Yo, what is up? Welcome back to McKiLL TV. Today we are looking back on yet another retro gaming classic from the PlayStation 1 era. However, this one may be a little bit more obscure, but it's a game I have a fond nostalgia for, as I grew up playing this game like many others from the PlayStation era. I too found this game on one of those PlayStation demo discs from the mid to late 90s, you know, those Pizza Hut or, PlayStation Magazine demos. Anyway, here today we look back on Ninja, Shadow of Darkness. Real quick before we get into it, if you're familiar with this channel, we cover horror and retro games, and today I wanted to look back at a classic game, as I know some of you follow this channel for the retro games as well. Ninja, Shadow of Darkness is a action-based beat-em-up style of game that focuses mainly on combat and platforming elements throughout the gameplay. The game was developed by Core Design and published by Eidos Interactive. Core Design was on one back in the PlayStation era, as they developed a good bit of great PlayStation classic games, and even ones as simple as Ninja Shadow of Darkness. This game stands as an underrated classic to many, including myself, who grew up playing this simple yet extremely fun game back in those days. However, revisiting this game today may prove to be a rather rough experience, as the game came out before the PlayStation begun to utilize the analog controller, so yeah, it's a D-pad controlled game, which isn't ideal for a game that has quick twitchy movements and platforming elements such as this game does. Here in Ninja Shadow of Darkness, the player takes on the role of Kurosawa, a super ninja who is tasked with the role of ridding Japan of an unspoken evil. Gameplay here is your typical PS1 style beat 'em up, with hand-to-hand combat being the primary fighting mechanic, but also with magic spells and weapons such as swords and throwing stars being available, as well as item pickups throughout the game. Core Design immediately began development of Ninja following the success of Tomb Raider series, but they didn't want a combat-based beat 'em up game to be using the same engine. So Core Design built Ninja Shadow of Darkness's engine from scratch in order to deliver a more unique gameplay style than their previous games. The game was originally supposed to release on Sega Saturn and PC, as well as the Sony PlayStation, but the Sega Saturn and PC ports of the game were eventually cancelled, as the game would only release on PlayStation back in 1998 due to issues and delays during the game's development. Upon release, the game garnered mixed reviews across the board, and the game was heavily compared to Tenchu Stealth Assassins, with many critics having issues with the game's overall controls and lack of any in-depth story. But these critiques aren't new for Core Design, as a few of their other beat-em-up style games such as Fighting Force, which I've covered previously on this channel, got the same type of critique with the lackluster story narratives in these games. But what many praised the game for was its fun, action-packed gameplay. Although a little bit repetitive throughout, most people really enjoyed the gameplay for a PlayStation game from the late 90s. The game has a pretty linear level structure, with every level being mostly straightforward. Pretty much defeat all enemies, get through some platforming sections, and fight a boss at the end of each level. And the game is relatively short, with only 16 levels, so the game does become repetitive over time, with most levels in the game being easily cleared in the matter of minutes, so the game's runtime is fairly short. But this is a beat 'em up game, so the goal here is rather simple, as the game mainly focuses on straight to the point action gameplay with little more to offer. But if you ask me, this is a classic nonetheless. Not just based off of the nostalgia, but because this game was fun as shit playing as a kid, and sometimes these simple games from the PS1 era are meant to be arcade-like and simple in order to appeal to a larger audience. I'm not saying Ninja Shadow of Darkness would be in my top PS1 games of all time, but it does reach the territory of being a classic regardless. If you're a retro gamer who enjoys classic games from this era, and you don't mind clunky controls, I would recommend this game even today, as a fun, straightforward game. You're not going to get much here in the way of storytelling or in-depth characters, but more of an arcade-style adventure that delivers on the simplicity of the good old late 90s PlayStation beat-em-up styles that were abundant for the time. And this game stands out for that simple reason. The game's graphics were par for the course for a game of this style and caliber back in '98, but the game did feature nice loading screen designs that were pretty memorable and cool. Overall, Ninja Shadow of Darkness was a memorable game from this era that stands out for being fun and action-packed more than anything else. I really enjoyed looking back on this title from the PlayStation 1, and if you enjoyed this video as well, be sure to hit that like button, as it helps out my channel greatly. And if you're interested in more retro classic games, be sure to subscribe to McKiLL TV, as I plan to cover more just like this, as well as many different horror games. So come on over to my channel, subscribe, and hang out, and I'll catch you in a future video.